Committee meeting to order of Tuesday, January 25th, 2022. Let me start with a roll call.
Yes. Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Present.
There you are. Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
And Chair Snedden.
Here. Thank you. And do we have any members of the public here to comment for items not on the agenda?
So if you are here to speak for items that are not on the agenda, please raise your hand within the app. Again, this is for items not on the agenda. And Chair Snedden, at this time, nobody has their hand raised.
Thank you. And then I'd like you to read the item, and then if it is all right with our colleagues on the Ordinance Committee, I want to do a little bit of agenda management on what our hopes are at the end of this meeting to make sure we have time for it. So you'd read the item first, please.
Yes, of course. So today we will be hearing an uncodified ordinance providing an economic recovery extension and transition period by amending, restating, and extending provisions previously included in the emergency economic recovery ordinances.
Thank you. And then just for agenda management to colleagues, Councilmember Jordan and Councilmember Gutierrez, this item goes directly to council, and I just wanted to make sure we had reserved a few minutes at the end, maybe 10 minutes, to offer our comments so that they could be considered also at the council meeting. And we'll be hearing public comment here, but also at the council meeting immediately following. And I just wanted to check with each of you if that works for you or if you have other suggestions. Councilmember Jordan.
Works for me. I'd even suggest we just go right to council, but that's probably just a little too abrupt. So I suspect we're just going to listen to public comment most of this time. So that's fine.
Okay. Thank you. And it is unusual that we would have an item that goes like this without time for deliberation, quite. And then Councilmember Gutierrez.
I'm okay with deliberating it.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity for us as the Ordinance Committee to look at it as an ordinance and at least have comments for council. So with that, if we could have the staff report.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Ordinance Committee members. My name is Jason Harris. I'm the city's Economic Development Manager. I'm kicking off the staff presentation today. I will be joined in the presentation by the city's Fire Marshal and the city's Transportation Planning Manager. I will also conclude the presentation and be available. All of us will be available for questions at the end. Next slide, please. So again, the recommendation before you today is the introduction of an ordinance. We're titling it the Economic Recovery Extension and Transition Ordinance, and it is amending, restating, and extending provisions of the previous included Emergency Economic Recovery Ordinance. This will be, as earlier referenced, heard by this committee this afternoon and by the full council later in the session today. If council introduces and carries this item forward, it would be coming back to the full council on February 1st for adoption, and it takes a 30-day period to take effect. So with that, next slide, please. So for background and summary, next slide, please. If we all recall, in early of 2020, the city, the state, the world was struck with a worldwide pandemic. Stay-at-home orders were issued throughout California and locally by our public health agencies in the spring of 2020. And only essential businesses were able to operate. Most indoor business activity was restricted. Council responded very quickly with an emergency order that allowed for businesses to operate outdoors and for the closure of State Street. And that was followed by an emergency economic recovery ordinance in a week, just short of a week later, that again extended those provisions and set an initial expiration date of September of 2020. This economic recovery ordinance allowed for all businesses citywide to establish outdoor expanded business premise, either on private property, into private parking lots or common areas, the creation of parklets where there was an on-street parking space, an extension of the sidewalk filling that area with a business activity, or extending outdoor business facilities on closed streets, principally State Street that was closed, creating the State Street Promenade, but there were also other partial street closures, West Victoria, the 1300 block of State Street, and 2 sections of roadways in the Funk Zone. Next slide, please. So this next few slides is a high-level summary of the emergency recovery and extension transition ordinance. We're referring to it in its acronym listed above. Principally, as I was introducing the item previously of the emergency ordinance, this carries forward that provision, allowing all businesses citywide to continue to operate outdoor business areas and parklets until the end of 2023, just over 22 months from now. And this is in broad recognition that businesses are still in recovery. Our economy is still in recovery. We are still in the grips of the pandemic, even though we do not have the public health orders restricting any type of indoor business activity. There's still a preference of the consumer to dine or congregate outdoors. This provision also allows for the continued closure of State Street while the State Street Master Plan is in development and the general plan changing the regulations for closure of the street is in process. Next slide, please. Now, here are some distinctions that this recovery extension ordinance highlights. Going back to that early emergency recovery ordinance, the street was closed very quickly in the spring of 2020 for an initial term of just under 4 months. At that point in time, our fire department was comfortable with a short-term waiver of the state and local mandated 20-foot fire lane down the center of State Street. We have a 14.5-foot fire lane that's in place and has been in place. And that emergency ordinance was extended twice, now set to expire this coming March. At this point, as we transition out of the emergency ordinance, the staff recommendation is to establish the 20-foot fire lane, as well as beginning to reopening the partially closed streets, similar on a March 8th timeline. An additional concept is being introduced is recognition of portability of the State Street outdoor business facilities. So this only pertains to those outdoor business areas on State Street that have facilities and the desire to have portable. Our public safety and special event operators are concerned with future parades and special events on the closed portion of State Street and having that a number of visitors, participants, and just on the sidewalks and in the area, as well as these outdoor business areas, all in one relatively tight space, limiting access. Also portability, the idea that you could easily remove these outdoor business facilities for frequent deep cleaning of the street, facilitate storm flow, and enhanced accessibility. The date of transition of portability is to be determined. I'll speak to that at the end of the presentation, but we are looking for any new business facilities on the State Street Promenade to be portable as of this date. Next slide, please. And then just lastly, 2 other provisions being introduced. One is outdoor cooking is looking to be prohibited. We've had some potential interest from some businesses expanding operations, and we're wanting to restrict that from a public safety standpoint. And then similarly, the sign exemption is no longer being carried forward. That original provision was put in when these newly established spaces, had no concepts, no orientation in the community. At this point, I think it's fairly well known who operates which of these outdoor business facilities. And then just lastly, as I referenced, the other provisions of the emergency ordinance, such as operating hours of the outdoor dining areas, the ability to operate parklets or other business areas on private property, are all being carried forward through this ordinance. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'd introduce the city's fire marshal, Ryan DiGilio, to speak to the next few slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Good afternoon, Chair Snedden and committee members. Coming before you this afternoon to talk about a little bit more of the reasoning and the logic behind the 20-foot wide fire lane needed down the center of State Street. As Jason pointed out earlier, currently we were okay with a 14.5-foot fire lane. This was back when the original emergency ordinance was granted, and we were under the impression that that would be for a short term, a little under 4 months. Fast forward almost 2 years later, we need to have that 20-foot wide fire lane back reinstated. The main reasoning, because we're going from an emergency ordinance to an economic recovery ordinance, we're not comfortable with taking on the liability of having limited access down State Street any longer. Again, just as a reminder, it's 20 feet wide down the middle of State Street, and it's a 13-foot, 6-inch vertical clearance. Again, that's a California Fire Code regulation, that's state law, which has been adopted by the Santa Barbara Municipal Code under Title 8. Next slide, please. Attached here are a couple pictures of some examples of why we need that access on State Street. As you can see on the picture on the right, that's our ladder truck. It can drive down State Street, but it has zero operating room to actually function some of the essential duties that may be required of that piece of apparatus. The picture on the left gives you a good idea of just how wide the ladder truck is once the stabilizers are put into place. It's roughly just a little under 18 feet wide. There's also compartments in our apparatus that open up and slide out that we can gain equipment out of. All this takes room to operate with firefighters running around, pulling hose lines. And just as reference, it's when there's a call for a fire in the city, there's a minimum of 5 pieces of apparatus, most likely 6 on State Street because of the type of buildings that are there. That takes a lot of room, and it takes, to be done well and efficient, it takes a lot of space. Next slide, please. Here's a couple examples of some incidents that have happened on State Street. The picture on the left shows the ladder truck with the stabilizers out and the ladder hoisted. As you can see, that 18 feet width comes into play really quick. On the right, it shows engines basically staged is what we call it, ready to go to work. For large scale incidents that may occur on State Street, we could easily see an upward of 10, 12, 15 pieces of apparatus just fire related on State Street. That doesn't include police vehicles, ambulances, command vehicles. Once again, it takes a lot of real estate to effectively run a fire. Some of the bigger concerns about State Street that we have too is that it's a high density part of town, as you know. There's a lot of folks that work in downtown, visit downtown, enjoy downtown. There's a large fire load in the downtown corridor with almost all the buildings with 0 lot lines and multi-story structures. The majority of those buildings as well are not outfitted with fire sprinkler systems, which helps us buy time in case of a fire. Next slide, please. So what the extension of the ordinance would look like as far as the fire lane would be concerned is that the outdoor business facilities cannot encroach into that 20-foot wide fire access lane. That would basically come down to 9 feet from the curb out to that designated lane, and 6 feet in some portions of State Street where there's a crosswalk and there's a jog in the actual physical layout of State Street. Next slide. This is a good description of what that would look like in that 9 feet and 6 feet off the curb requirements. We're trying to maintain a straight line down State Street. Line of sight is crucial for us when responding and also giving us the appropriate working distance. So that 9 foot is for most of the block, and that 6 foot requirement comes into play during crosswalks where the street takes a jog. Next slide. Within the ordinance, we've also picked out 3 specific buildings on State Street that need to be maintained clear in front of the buildings. And the reason why is because our ladder truck needs to be as close to the building as possible in order to extend the full length of the ladder to the top of the building. The farther you are away from the building, obviously the angle gets lower on the ladder and it can't be used to its fullest extent. So those 3 buildings include the Balboa building at 735 State, 820 State, and the Granada Tower at 1214 State. By ensuring the areas in front of these 3 buildings are clear, we can then position our ladder truck to use its fullest extent. Next slide, please. Again, just some pictures of what that would look like. The picture on the left is the Balboa building, and it paints a good picture of why the ladder truck needs to be able to get in front of that building as close as possible to be able to extend the ladder to its full reach and use all of its possible capabilities during an emergency. Next slide. With that, I'll pass it on to Jessica Grant, my colleague over in transportation.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair Sneddon and committee members. I'm Jessica Grant. I'm the interim Public Works Downtown Manager. I'm going to cover the circulation and portability sections of the ordinance. Next, oh, no, that's good. With respect to the circulation changes, the previous ordinance allowed for partial roadway closures behind the State Street Promenade at the 0 blocks of West Victoria Street, 1300 block of State, and 2 areas in the Funk Zone on Helena and Santa Barbara Streets. The transition ordinance requires these roadways to be fully open to 2-way traffic by March 8th. Next slide. The reason for these changes is there are capital projects coming soon to the area that will affect the downtown circulation that I will discuss in a moment. There's also continued need to have strong east-west connections for all modes of traffic, as well as for emergency access and response in the downtown area. Next slide. On this map, the blue rectangle outlines the current State Street Promenade boundaries. The green lines on the map indicate new bike-friendly routes coming to construction this spring and summer that will connect the west side, east side, and downtown neighborhoods. To have a bike-friendly route, the vehicle volumes and speeds need to be reduced. In downtown on Sola Street, vehicles will be diverted at a couple of intersections that are indicated on the stars on the map. And there will be additional traffic signals introduced on the route. So Sola Street is timed for cyclists. If the 1300 block of State Street remains as one way, it would add additional vehicle volumes to Sola between State and Anacapa Streets, thus not making it a comfortable street for cyclists of all ages and abilities. If the 0 block of West Victoria remains as one way, roadway volumes also get heavier on Sola and other parallel streets, which does affect the downtown circulation for all modes and for emergency access and response. Also in the city's permit process is the relocation of the Saturday Farmers Market from the Coda commuter lot to city right-of-way at the 0 blocks of Carrillo and then 900 and 1000 blocks of State Street, which is indicated in orange on this map. On Saturdays till about 3, the 0 blocks of 0 blocks of Carrillo will be closed. While the market is not slated to open till about February 2023, We do need some infrastructure projects in this area ahead of the market's relocation this spring and summer that will require temporary traffic diversion. Because of these projects, downtown circulation will change and there will be a higher demand on streets between Carrillo and Sola streets to move people. While not shown on this map, there are two other areas in the funk zone needing to revert back to two-way circulation as well. The first location is on Helena between Mason and East Cabrillo. And the second location is on State Street between Yananali and the railroad tracks. Earlier in the pandemic, staff worked with business owners to create more outdoor space by implementing non-typical roadway traffic control. This was done at a time when the traffic volumes were very low. But now that the traffic volumes have rebounded, we are recommending the streets be returned to normal circulation. Next slide. All of these roadways, as they convert back to their original configurations, there will be 6 outdoor dining facilities affected. These businesses could still establish parklets similar to what other businesses have done in the city. Next slide. Let's change gears and move on to the topic of portability. Why we're talking about this now is because we need to further address promenade cleaning and maintenance and stormwater and the potential for community events. We will be working with the State Street Interim Ordinance Ad Hoc Committee to develop guidelines for portability. The ordinance requires any new business to follow guidelines immediately. We will be seeking direction from the Ad Hoc Committee on when existing facilities need to transition to portability. We currently have a mix of outdoor facilities ranging from very portable to not portable at all. Portability is defined in the ordinance as equipment and furnishings capable of being removed in 24 hours, can be removed without mechanized equipment, and can be temporarily anchored for safety and security. Next slide. What we really see is these portability measures as a way to balance business operations, the needs for business patrons getting to and from these outdoor facilities, and larger community needs of State Street from a mobility standpoint and also from arts and entertainment perspective, accommodating events on State Street. With respect to ADA, portability would enable businesses to locate ramps outside but adjacent to their facilities, which would leave more room for tables and paths of travel inside the facility and would enable businesses to share ramp facilities in some cases. With respect to parades or other special events, historically, special events have attracted tens of thousands of people. There is a public safety concern of having that amount of people filling the sidewalks to the curb and a parade in operation with business facilities in the roadway. Public safety response and access would be restricted, and additional public safety conflicts with these collective uses commingling are a concern. So given the day-to-day business and promenade functions, as well as for special events, we need to also make sure that the promenade is cleaned and maintained. Next slide. These are some images of cleaning and maintenance in the promenade. The city staff removes trash and debris from areas around and between business facilities. And businesses are responsible for cleaning inside their own facilities. However, there are platforms that provide an opportunity for organic material to accumulate underneath, and we are unable to sweep or wash these areas inside and under the business enclosures. Over time, these areas can be soiled and potentially causing odors and attracting pests. In the longer term, portability will allow for enhanced cleaning. We really envision over the next 2 years that we will need to do deep quarterly cleaning, like pressure washing to keep outdoor facilities and promenade fresh and pest-free. We'll work with the businesses for timing of the power washing to minimize disruptions to their businesses. Next slide. The outdoor facilities also need to minimize impediments to storm flow. City streets are designed to carry water, which is a good thing when nearby storm drain infrastructure and creeks are overtaxed. Portability allows for businesses to temporarily remove facilities to allow the street to function unimpeded till the storm event is no longer a hazard. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Jason Harris to discuss the effective date and outreach.
Thank you, Ms. Grant. Next slide, please. So as we've referenced there, you can see here on the column, there's the column of what's existing, what's new. So let's read across the top. So the ordinance outlines what is new for new business coming in March 8th. The fire lane would be implemented. New businesses will need to make accommodation for that. And again, this is on the State Street Promenade. The concept of portability for any new business is effective from this date forward. For existing business, again, the March 8th fire lane is the installation date. Business will need to make accommodation for that fire lane. And then the ordinance in section C outlines existing facilities needing to transition to portability, and staff provides 3 dates and timelines for accommodation. Effectively, really looking at special events, parades, either this summer, this coming winter, so the June 1st or November 1st of this year dates, and or really no events, special events or parades this year, really looking to reschedule those out into 2023, and then looking at a June 1st date. Next slide, please. Staff has conducted a series of outreach and communications, series of press releases, social media notices. We've had a presentation to the State Street Advisory Committee, did hand delivery to State Street businesses. And then also we had a meeting with downtown business owners on Friday the 14th, as well as the South Coast Chamber of Commerce also organized a meeting last week on the 20th. Next slide, please. Overall, pretty collective across the board concerns with these changes to the roadways as referenced. One, overall loss of revenue, a loss of dining area for businesses equals a loss of revenue to them. The timeline of compliance has been raised as a significant concern of ability to find contractors or construction firms to be able to make any modifications by a March 8th time period. Cost of compliance and needing to modify any existing outdoor business facilities to one, comply with the fire lane and or comply to portability was raised of concern. And then overall concern being customer experience and preference of dining off of the roadway, an elevated condition in the case of some businesses that have actually created or purchased gazebo type of enclosed roof types of structures. And then just lastly, overall comment and concern with the current Omicron phase of the pandemic that's passing through right now. Even though there's no public health orders, the general public consumer has kind of withdrawn significantly. Many businesses are seeing a significant dip in revenues and business activity at this current time. So this just impacts all of those areas of concern. So with that, that concludes the staff presentation. And again, the recommendation slide we can just leave up for reference. And myself and my colleagues are available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. And do we have any questions from the committee? Councilmember Jordan.
Thank you, Councilmember Snedden. I have a couple. Jason, I can start with you. Mr. Harris, sorry. So there's a reference in the presentation to a distinction between existing outdoor business facilities and new. Can you help me with what is new? What do you call new?
So new would be any business that is not open yet. The provision in the recovery ordinance and now in this extension transition ordinance is that any of these extended, expanded outdoor business areas, facilities, or parklets are all required to have an adjacent business with a leased premise and that's open and occupied. So for instance, new businesses, we have a new sandwich shop coming onto State Street at 700 State Street, and they're interested in creating an outdoor business facility. Based upon the council action today, staff will be able to follow up with them and give them direction as to under what kind of parameters they would be building out their outdoor business facility here in the next few weeks while they prepare for opening. That would be a new business. Existing are all businesses that have some presence currently out on, again, the State Street Promenade.
I know of one at least, just might be a block or two down, that has a platform already, but the business is not open. So you would call that new in your definition?
Yes, I think that's, I think you might be describing Wildworks,
Yep.
if I recall,
Yep.
and they've been anxiously awaiting their building occupancy. So I think that's one that's on the line. And in that case, you know, again, this January 25th date versus a March 8th date, obviously we would be working with the business to comply with March 8th at the latest, sooner preferably if they're haven't opened and would be making changes to that space.
But as far as portability, that potentially would not be a new business?
So I think that's probably one in the gray area where they, I think, established a foothold once they, you know, signed a lease for the space, even though they're not operational. So we would need to consult with the city attorney. The fact that they've built that space, I would, you know, kind of tend to favor to recognize as an existing business in the regards that they have a signed lease, even though they haven't started operations.
We could opine and help with that too, right?
Honorable
So,
Chair, may I?
We see City Attorney Dan Henschke.
It's like only my first question, Mr. Henschke. I'm
I was gonna
already.
give you if I may, give you a simple answer
Okay.
to your question. The Wildworks facility would be considered to be an outdoor business facility existing on January 25th. So it would be subject to the existing facility rules.
Okay.
Simple
And
answer.
then while you're there, because I know you're probably the legal beagle brain trust on this, typically in land use, we also recognize when we're doing stuff like this, stuff that's in the process at a certain point, past a certain line, deemed complete, whatever it may be, that type of thing. I know there are at least a couple others. So the one in particular that I would reference, I know, is the old half of the Panera Bread that's next to 7-Eleven. And I know they're slogging through the community development process. And have you talked at all about or given any consideration to people that are tied up in that process in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of less services from the city to get stuff done? And would there be any point in discussing at what point people are in that process to also qualify as just meeting the portability date later with the rest of the street?
Honorable Chair, Councilmember Jordan, we need to distinguish between facilities within the promenade and facilities outside the promenade. Is this particular facility that you're talking about inside the promenade or outside the promenade?
So it's that corner where 7-Eleven is, took over half of the frontage. And the
Oh,
other
okay.
half on the corner is vacant. And I know they're slogging through the process. I don't know where they are, but I'm just using that as an example of somebody that's been going through the process that they might control a little, they might control none of the process. And so they've based their lease and their project on the temporary status of our gift to them. So I'm just wondering if that has come up in the conversation or it's worth part of the discussion.
Thank you. Yes, I can answer that question. Woof. That was the beagle part. under the ordinance, we focused on the existence of the outdoor facility. In that particular case, because there is no outdoor facility in existence, they would be subject to the portability requirements, the same as any other existing business on State Street that does not have an existing outdoor facility. And so we drew a very bright line. It's either if you have a facility that's been built under the EERO, then you're treated differently than if you don't have a facility that's built under the EERO. And so that would be an instance of a business not yet in existence. Once they become in existence, they'll be authorized to put in a facility as authorized under the ordinance at that time. Regarding the notion that they have some kind of expectation, at the time they entered into the lease, I would assume the ordinance was set to expire on March 28th of this year. So they don't have any kind of reasonable expectation in any kind of continuation of anything, regardless of how permanent, under the existing EERO.
Fair enough. And then I think both of you stay there because I think both of you may have a different take on this. There's a couple references in the ordinance to the long document, the operation of a blah, blah, blah on State Street Promenade that are referencing a June revision that includes at least 2 pages of what I call design guidelines, not subject to state law or building codes. So design guidelines that are separate from ADA requirements or heating equipment, fire requirements. They're the color, the style, that type of thing. And we continue to reference these, even though, as you both know, internally, as late as last week, we have talked about not requiring those type of design requirement changes at this time and allowing that to work through the ad hoc subcommittee. So how are we reconciling that on a trust basis going forward, that just all of a sudden somebody's going to say, hey, we passed that and we're referencing that, and those design guidelines are part of it, and we'll have people out there pulling umbrellas off and saying they're not the right color, or saying you can't have an overhead accent light component. How do we reconcile that?
Sure, I can answer that question very easily. The existing ordinance basically allows existing facilities to remain the way that they are now, as long as they are modified to comply with the 20-foot guidelines. So the way that the ordinance is written, it talks about the applicable provisions of those guidelines. And so with regard to existing facilities, the design criteria and those things that you talk about don't really apply, as long as they are outside. Like if they have lights, they have to be above the 13.6, and the facility has to be outside of the 20-foot. But other than that, the idea was to leave the existing facilities as modified to comply with the 20-foot, leave them alone until the council tells them to get out of there completely, which was the 3 optional dates that Mr. Harris referred to in his presentation.
Thanks. Madam Chair, I just have a couple more for the fire chief. I know we're going to do all this again. Jason, before I leave you, when we get to council, will you talk about the equity discussion also that you talked about last week? So I think I'd like to hear more. I'd like to hear that again in the wider audience, please. And then I know Chris Males, the fire chief, is hanging around. I just have a couple quick ones for him, if I could invite him on.
Hello, Councilmember Jordan. Yes, I'm on.
Hello there.
Hi there.
So, couple quick ones. Is the 20-foot enough? That's really my question. So I get that you're carving out Balboa up the street here at that 800 building and the Granada, but are there other site-specific areas in town, particularly due to a couple-story building, so smaller than the 3 that you're referencing, but a couple-story building where you know there are going to be outdoor dining facilities on both sides of the street, and is a 20-foot enough? Because I'm really taking Ryan's, picture drawing of, it's not just the supports on a ladder truck. You've got other trucks, you've got people who need to walk on the outside of those supports, dragging hoses and moving other equipment. So should we be considering more than 20 feet?
Councilmember Jordan, great question, thank you. So the 20 feet was not invented in a vacuum. It is a state fire code that is based on an analysis of the needs of a metropolitan or municipal fire department. Would we like to have more? Sure. I mean, I'd love to have a 4-lane freeway down every street in Santa Barbara. That would really help us stacking our fire engines in on a major incident. But to answer your question, yes, it's enough. It will be fine for us. With the smaller buildings, we typically use ground ladders. We use smaller ladders that are pulled off engines or off the ladder truck. We have other ladders besides the aerial. The specific concern with the taller buildings is that the taller the building, the closer we need to be with the aerial. And so Chief DiGiulio mentioned those 3 buildings because of their height. We need to be really close, and you'll see in the picture on the left right now. But lower buildings, we can be farther away and we can deploy ground ladders. We're also kind of concentrating on the ladder truck, and I just thought I'd throw this out also. When we have an engine deployed, they have one or more or multiple hoses coming off the engines, and they don't come off the engine and make a quick right turn or left turn. They make a gradual bend and they take up a lot of room. So we've done analysis and we're completely comfortable with the 20 feet. Now, I will say this caveat: if in the future a 2-story building becomes a 6-story building or a 7-story building, we're going to have to revisit that. But with the current state of the configuration of State Street, what we did was we took our ladder truck and we took our crews and we went all the way from the 1200 block down to the 500 block, and our ladder truck crews looked at every single building. And of course, they're the experts with deciding how to, quote, we call it laddering a building. And they were completely confident with their ability to work within the 20-foot footprint as long as those 3 buildings were carved out. So the short and the long, yes, we're comfortable with 20 feet.
Okay, 2 more quick ones. In your opinion, from a public safety standpoint, can Solstice Parade, Holiday Parade, and July 4th Parade operate on the promenade with the 20-foot fire lane and outdoor business facilities in place?
I think so. I think that's taking this into account also. I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with the setbacks. I think what's important is that we're able to identify to the parade participants that, hey, you've got a 20-foot footprint to work with. And, you can't be dragging a 25-foot wide trailer up Steve Street. So, there's a little bit of concern with the Fiesta Parade with horses. But I think, 20 feet will give us more than enough room to continue those traditions. I think we'll be fine with that.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Excellent questions. And I saw Councilmember Gutierrez, your camera came on. Welcome back. And did you have questions?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I had questions about the previous, before the pandemic, we had a fee process for using the sidewalk. And I'm just curious as to, has that been enforced since the shutdown? And is there any talk about implementing that for the sidewalks in the street?
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, I can answer that question if I may. We do have the outdoor dining license agreement process that is in place. It is available to businesses who want to establish uses on the sidewalk area of State Street. that particular ordinance was suspended by the EERO previously in order to allow what we have out there now within the roadway without a permitting process. We do need to make certain amendments to the outdoor dining license agreement ordinance to accommodate some of the uses, for example, within the furniture zone of the sidewalk, as opposed to just adjacent to the building. And those are issues that are under consideration now by staff as to how to amend that in order to allow businesses to operate on the sidewalk area in a way that is consistent with ADA and other accessibility requirements.
Now, remind me, how was that all worked out? Was it done through square footage or was it done per piece of furniture?
In terms of the licenses, the outdoor dining license agreement, I would need to defer to the public works staff that administers that particular licensing program. But there were criteria within the outdoor dining license ordinance that specified where you could put those facilities. And some of those restrictions are the ones that need to be changed in order to expand the use of outdoor dining licenses to more areas of the sidewalk downtown.
But we haven't had that conversation yet.
No.
We haven't brought that up.
Correct. Staff is still working on that and making those revisions. We've had some internal discussions, but we have not had an opportunity. It was like one thing at a time. Let's get the extension and then do the outdoor dining license amendments.
Sure. I just wonder, well, I'll save my comments for later. That's my questions for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Gutierrez. And then I have a few questions. So first, so the sort of legal designation that it's not an emergency ordinance and that we're shifting to economic recovery. From a legal standpoint, what are we basing that designation on, that we're no longer in emergency?
Okay, so let me clarify. The existence of an emergency is different from the use of an urgency ordinance to adopt measures that go into effect immediately. What we are saying is that based upon the information that we have right now, we need to adopt a regular ordinance. The regular ordinance requires the introduction and then 5 days later, the adoption, and then it goes into effect 30 days later, as opposed to an urgency ordinance, which goes into effect immediately. The purpose of this ordinance is to respond to the existence of the pandemic. And so we're not calling into question the existence of the pandemic, but it's really a procedural issue more than are we doing this ordinance because we have an ongoing situation that requires economic recovery? Yes. That being said, there are certain things that we did very early on in the pandemic, such as allowing the businesses to have a 14.5-foot access corridor that we're recommending that we no longer do because the justification for that no longer exists.
So I guess, and I do see Interim City Administrator York's hand up too, but just when you said, and I'm just trying to understand it. So just, you said based on the information we have now, we need to adopt a regular ordinance. And I guess that's my question is, what is the information that we're basing it on now? That we need economic recovery, or?
Yes, and it's really a matter of, is there a sufficient basis for concluding that you need to take immediate action in order to protect the public from an emergency that would justify using the special process for adoption of an ordinance, which takes effect immediately, as opposed to the regular process for adoption of the ordinance. It's purely a procedural issue at this point. And our recommendation as the legal office is that you have the time to use the process for the adoption of a regular ordinance, which is what this one is.
Okay. And then I guess, since this is really just a process question, that's what I'm trying to get at the bottom of which parts of the process need to be immediate and which parts of the process can be extended. And so does it matter on the categories? Sort of the fire lane consideration seems immediate, but other issues that were sort of related to the portability seem not really to fall in that same category. So I guess my process question is the justification for maybe separating those out from each other.
Excellent question, Honorable Chair. The recommendation is for the fire lane to go in immediately because of all of the reasons that the fire marshal and the fire chief said. In terms of how long the corrected facilities can remain out there, that's the policy choice for council. For example, portability is a policy choice, not a legal choice. When you transition from the existing facility to something new, whether it's June 1st of this year or November 1st of this year, or June 1st of next year, that's a policy choice. That's not a legal consideration. And so I have no input on that other than to say it's up to the council.
Okay, thank you so much for that clarification. I'm trying to make the case that we can separate those out without endangering the public safety. So thank you. And then I have a question for the taller buildings. Completely understand the need, and just wondering, you mentioned that for the taller building, you have to be even closer. And in front of, say, the Granada building, could there be sidewalk dining there if it was tables and chairs and no structures? Would that be, just from a safety only standpoint, would you still be able to maneuver? So it's not completely cleared out of any outdoor dining, but if it was up on the sidewalk.
Yeah, Honorable Chilson, good question. And that's correct. The street is really the area we need cleared the most. And that's basically for our apparatus. We're used to, bending our tactics around areas that have tables and chairs and parked cars. And so it's more of the permanent structures, quote unquote, permanent structures in front of the buildings that would be very difficult, if not impossible, to move in an emergency situation. So it would be pertaining to just the street.
Thank you. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for all of your flexibility throughout this whole process. So really, thank you.
Sure.
So yeah. So then my question, I think we've had this answered a couple of times. I just want to be sure, in the staff report, not the ordinance itself, but in the staff report on page 3 and the 3rd paragraph, it says referring to any new businesses. But then on page 4, it refers to businesses existing before January 25th needing to be composed entirely of portable equipment and findings. And I'm just want to make extra sure, because it seems to conflict in the staff report, that new will not need to have the portability.
Under the ordinance, and I'll refer to the ordinance because that would be the operative legal document.
Okay.
A new outdoor business facility placed after January 25th under the proposed ordinance would need to be portable. And so it's the new, we're focusing, like I said in my answer to a committee member Jordan, we're focusing on the facility as opposed to the business. We're trying to treat the businesses essentially the same. It's the facility that we're concerned about.
So then my question is if we, Ms. Bjork, did you have a, yeah.
I would have a comment, but I'll wait for you to get done with this. It pertains to an earlier question that Council Member Jordan asked, and I wanted to have the police chief also answer it.
Okay, thank you. So I guess my question about portability is if we were to say we wanted to take more time and finesse and understanding with the definition of portability and what it is that we're trying to address. And in that interim time, when before we sort of come up with a definition of portability that is acceptable, just assuming that we might go that direction, what would happen in the in-between time? So something on January 25th would be in which set of guidelines?
Sure, I'll be happy to answer that question. All right, Honorable Chair, the way that the ordinance is structured under Section 2D, new facilities after January 25th have to be portable, and portability is simply defined as basically being removable upon 24 hours notice without the use of hand tools. Other than that, what that looks like is not defined in the ordinance and is left for future guidelines. So if somebody wanted to come in, say, and put something up after January 25th, they couldn't they couldn't put a new platform in. They could put something out there that meets the portability definition, and there's no standards for that at this particular point. It just has to be portable.
So if we did want to make adjustments to the definition of portable, which I've heard a lot of input on, and also in our ad hoc committee, that we might want to be looking at different ways of defining portable, what would be our timeline for that? Could we leave it out of the ordinance today, the portability portion?
The answer is yes. You could leave it out of the ordinance today. The question then becomes what do you do with regard to any kind of transition? If the council, for example, chose to simply say, we're going to go with a 20-foot, and other than that, we're going to let businesses put in facilities like they did under the old ordinance, which would be platforms and such, under the rules that are currently in existence, you could do that. The question the policy question you have to ask yourself is whether you think that's a reasonable idea, given that this is a 2-year, or whatever the program is that you decide in terms of the transition. It's really an issue of transition.
Okay, thank you. And we have leeway in that. I think that's what I'm getting at, because I actually think the transition needs to be a longer timeline. So I'm just trying to figure out how to get there. And then for just a question, I think for Ms. Grant, about the timing of the Saturday Farmers Market move. Do you know when that's expected to transition?
Thanks, Chair Sneddon, for the question. It is anticipated, it's still going through the permitting process. We anticipate a go live date somewhere around February of 2023. There are infrastructure improvements that do need to happen ahead of the market. So it's not a complete setup tomorrow. There are things that need to happen as far as in treatments on Carrillo for the 0 blocks, as well as some signal modifications and a couple of sidewalk installation improvements for some access ramps.
Thank you. And I just want to confirm that is approved and agreed upon to move forward regardless of what happens with the police station location. Is that correct?
This is all happening in a tandem process right now, but we do need to be prepared the day if it does go through and permitting and the quota lot is closed. We want to make sure we have a home immediately ready for the farmers market.
Okay, thank you. And then the timing of the SOLA bike path construction, when is that scheduled to begin?
It is anticipated as spring, summer time. And we don't have exact timelines yet. Once we have a contractor on board, we'll have better timeframes, but it is anticipated to hit somewhere around that time.
Thank you. And I guess this is maybe an overarching question with the circulation patterns. I think in the downtown master planning, I think the whole circulation patterns are going to be looked at, presumably. And so I'm wondering about the Sola bike path. There was discussion about whether it could be one street over or one street back. And I realize we're past that decision point, but I'm just wondering if we're sort of setting a stone in the downtown circulation pattern, working around that one where we might be able to consider maybe a shift of that path based on what we want for the entire circulation pattern. Just a comment on that, yeah.
Yes, Chair Sneddon, it is the circulation will change for Sola Street, but you are correct. We will be, as part of the State Street Master Planning effort, looking at all circulation for all modes.
Okay, thank you. And then I just have a couple more questions. For cleaning around the structures, could we shift that responsibility or the cost of that to the businesses? I mean, if it is, it really does seem to be an added expense and a big consideration for what we want those structures to be like. How could that be something we could shift to them?
Chair Sneddon,
go ahead.
Excuse me. Chair Sneddon, so that's something that would likely need to be done through the implementation of a fee for use of the street. Right now, as was discussed in the presentation, cleaning of the promenade is something that specifically downtown parking is responsible for, along with the sidewalks and the rest of the State Street Plaza. And that certainly does represent an additional cost in our budget to do that. And with all of the facilities in State Street, having to go around them rather than just, the street sweeper going down the center of the street to actually kind of get all those nooks and crannies does represent obviously additional time and additional expense. And so the way to recover that would be to assess a fee on the businesses for those facilities, which would then be used to offset that cost.
Mm-hmm. And might it be worthwhile to the business facilities to pay that fee rather than paying the expense of modifications? I don't know if we've asked.
So I think that there are, there are sort of two different things kind of at play there. So, the cost of going around the facilities exists so long as the facilities are there. But I think if what you're getting at is the question of portability and the ability to clean portable facilities, where that portability becomes an advantage for cleaning is that, there's the ability to fully remove the items from the street and then do kind of a deep clean. So, particularly for those platforms that are out there now, as Ms. Grant mentioned, organic material can accumulate underneath them. We've got no way of cleaning underneath them, particularly after storms when things can wash under there. So going to something that's portable enables us to basically scrub the floors of what is effectively restaurant space every now and again. So does that answer your question?
Okay. It does, yeah. And Mr. Maurer?
Chair Sneddon, yes, if I could add, with portability, I've heard several times mentioned that platforms aren't an option in a under our portability standards, and I disagree with that. There are incredible modular facilities that can be assembled by hand, 2 or 3 people, put them together, interlocking, safe. My department is going to provide anchoring specifications or guideline, or we would call it detail, so that proper anchoring of whether it's a modular platform or it's railings or other structures that they want to ensure that they're safe and they won't slip and move, whether it's ADA access ramps, same thing. Those things can be done. To your question, and to just add on to what Sarah said about the deep clean, the concern if we shifted that burden to the private businesses in the public right away, it only takes one business who doesn't do what they're supposed to, and then has rats under their area, and then it's a public health crisis that we really don't want to have on State Street. So I think that sort of standardization is important. And just one other, and I completely appreciate the time concern that everyone has and the investment businesses had, just from a civil engineering side, that if businesses have to make the change and they, if this is adopted with the 20-foot safety lane, at a minimum, we want to give them the option to build to an end state that if we're going to have parades and other activities on State, that they don't have to go through it twice. And, and of course, it's council's option as to when, if ever, you want to make it permanent, but at least some can say, hey, we're going to build to the end state right now because we don't want to do it twice.
Thank you. And I can ask you one more question about the portability. I really only just have one more question. With the, I'm really happy you mentioned that about the modular platforms, and I have sort of two questions about that. Could they be built also to allow stormwater to flow under them so that that's not as much of a concern? Is that something that could also be happened with modular?
Yes, but I guess it would be a challenge because the height is so low. It's basically just going up to curb height. So you're going to have something, as you saw in the pictures with a large storm event, you're going to have water probably going over the top. The nice thing here is our weather, at least the large storm events, are usually pretty predictable. So if you see, and they usually only occur about 3 months of the year, and unfortunately not enough right now, but if we see heavy weather coming in and we are in a portable state, it's in everyone's best interest to protect their property and to make the street function as a storm drain as it's designed to remove the big items. And it prevents them from getting damaged and it lets the street operate the way it's supposed to.
Thank you. And then I guess I just have two more questions about portability, and then it will save time at council that I won't be asking them then. But so the definition of being able to be moved with just hand tools, and I'm thinking about the large planters or things like that, that maybe they had a forklift, a small forklift to move them, or something that wasn't that couldn't just be put on a dolly or lifted by a person by hand, but is still allows for cleaning and allows for storm drainage and is not, a very large permanent structure. And so that's one question about sort of portability. Is that really the word we want to be using, or is it really that we need flow around it and we need it to be accessible and we need it to be able to be maneuvered around in an emergency? So I'm kind of wondering about this, the portability as the concept when really like the planters aren't hand tool type things that you take apart. Yeah.
I think they can be. They can size them that they can use either hand dollies or what are called air jacks, which you see that they move pallets around on, but it's operated by a person. Some of them are motorized, but it's operating by a person who's walking behind them, as opposed to having someone sitting on a seat of a piece of rolling stock equipment. Because if you can imagine, if we were going to have the street cleared for a parade or a storm event, and then you have 5-10 forklifts operating in one block of State Street, our businesses, our pedestrians and all couldn't function in that space.
I guess that's what I'm getting at. If the 20 feet is enough for parades, and if stormwater can move around it because it's planters, why does it have to be portable? I guess that's what I'm
Well,
getting at.
I think
Yeah.
Chief Melican is going to address the 20 feet from a
Okay.
public safety standpoint. I'll let Chief address that. And
Okay.
that's what Ms. Bjork wanted to talk about.
Okay, thank you. So I'll end my questions there, and then Chief Melikian, and then we do have some public comment that we want to be sure to get to. Thank you. Chief Melikian?
Chair Sneddon and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity. My understanding of the question is that is a 20 feet wide corridor sufficient or safe to handle a parade? And I would argue, particularly with things in the street, that's probably not. The best example that I can give you, I did spend a number of years working the Rose Parade, and Colorado Boulevard is 72 feet wide. And on New Year's Day, there's a 6-foot encroachment that's allowed on either side for people to sit out on the curb, which still leaves about 60 feet for the parade itself. And I'm the first one to acknowledge that those floats in that item are bigger than generally what we're talking about. But the challenge, I think, with a 20-foot corridor going basically adjacent to the portable dining areas would really be problematic in terms, particularly when if people have been drinking or they're excited about the parade or about the events. And it makes it very difficult to control, because there's really no room to do it, to sort of intervene between the parade participants and the audience without interrupting the parade. So I think that would be problematic.
Thank you. And Councilmember Jordan, does that answer your question?
Yes, I'll probably have some more questions at council, but so far so good.
Thank you, Chief. And then I think we can go to public comment now.
Okay, if you would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand within the app. We'll have Holly bring up the timer. Currently, we have one speaker with their hand up. It's Bob Stout. Bob Stout, please go ahead.
Hi, I assume you can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great, thanks. I was on my computer and had a different feed. I'd first like to just thank everybody. 2 years ago, city staff and elected officials made a huge decision. And that decision, in my opinion, to expand outdoor dining as much or more so than just having State Street closed for, open for pedestrians, was monumental in keeping downtown open during COVID. And hence, with the expanded dining, I think it's really been a draw. I've seen so many locals downtown. So I think we all know that. I really appreciate this meeting. I know the next meeting you have is going to be long and drawn out, and I apologize for that. I do feel like with the fire chief, fire marshal, city attorney, I've learned so much, and I think it's going to be hard to teach people this in the next meeting. I get it. But I really think it points out, I could pinpoint certain particulars about cleanliness, about the ability to pay for it, about stormwater. My little parklet off State Street was removed, and I was very happy to see that we didn't have any problems, just some dirt and leaves, and the stormwater was not a problem. But I mean, I think there's issues to talk about. Councilman Gutierrez brought up the possibility of amendments to the sidewalk dining ordinance, which there's no sidewalk dining now. If it's lost in the street, is that more of a possibility, et cetera? So I guess I would just like to say that I think portability is a huge deal. I was happy to hear, and I don't know the gentleman's name, but he came off pretty MacGyver-ish to me, because he was talking about platforms that could be more portable, and that would be something. I think, long story short, I hope that the ad hoc committee that I think you three are on, or another group, I guess it's not the State Street Advisory Committee, is formed to hear more of these issues, particularly about the 1300 block, the West Victoria, and the portability. With all deference to the bike lane, I like bike too, and I know that plan's been in place, but I just really think that we need more time to look at some of these things. And I would urge you to delay everything except the fire lane to the end of 2023. Thank you so much for what you've done in your time.
Thank you, Mr. Stout. Do we have another public speaker?
Yes, our next speaker will be Richard Yates. Richard Yates, please go ahead.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'll echo what Bob said about how much we appreciate what the city did with the creativity to allow us to stay in business when COVID hit.
I would urge you to delay
I'm sorry?
everything except the fire lane.
We really appreciate that. Allowed our businesses to stay afloat, but also helped us to provide jobs that keep the city coffers have some income coming in at a time when there was virtually no business at all. We do understand that some protocols were adjusted to allow for that, and that fire safety is of prime importance, and we certainly respect that. On our block and on Victoria, there is plenty of fire lane right now, but there's a proposal to make this 2 ways again. And we were not invited or allowed to have any input into the creation of that proposal. And this is a serious, I think, flaw in how the city's approached this, much as they've been very creative up to this point. For us not to have any input now that we have very viable businesses outside on the 1300 block of State and on West Victoria, which I believe once the streets are made 2-way again, we will lose at the current moment, adequate fire lane size that we have. We have 25 feet on our street, 28 feet on Victoria. So we would really like to request that we relook at this proposal. Had we been included at the beginning a couple years ago when COVID hit and we put our parklets in place, and not knowing then that the city was going to require our streets to become 2-way again at some point. If we would have had input at that point, we could have perhaps worked together to figure out something different. So I'd like to ask the city to maybe display some of the same flexibility in how the bike path is implemented as we did at the beginning, and allow our businesses to continue to exist and to contribute to the city and the cultural richness of the city. So that's my point, and I'm out of time, and we can take this up more, but perhaps at the city council meeting later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yates. And do we have another public speaker?
Yes, our next speaker will be Robin Elander. Robin Elander, please go ahead.
City staff and council, thank you so very much for all of the time, dedication, and answering my questions and many others as we go through this process. Really appreciate how much time and energy you are all taking today just to understand the complexities of the decisions that you're making. I want to just be very clear that your decisions will affect the livelihoods of our downtown business owners, residents, and visitors, and has potential to significantly alter our downtown and its economic viability. So where you can take the time to make the critical decisions regarding portability, events, etc., it really is a nuanced, very particular way that we need to work with businesses, with city staff, and find out what the real best solutions are to make particularly the portability element actually a viable option. So where possible, do take that time. And I know that you are really trying to make the best decision as possible you can. Where it's possible in terms of the 1300 block and Victoria, if some elements of the design and capital project could be implemented earlier, say for along SOLA closer to the neighborhoods, while still keeping both 1300 block and Victoria 2-way for the time being, and then add that in afterward, I think that would go a real long way to support our business community in this challenging time and give people the time to redesign their area as well as plan and save to be able to make it look great as we all want. So thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. Elander. Do we have another public speaker?
We do. Our next speaker will be Patrick Casey. Patrick Casey, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you for taking the time to allow us all to give a quick point of view. We know we got a lot of work later on today, so I'll keep this one short. We appreciate all of your work, but we do need help from our council to create a balanced, sustainable, and manageable plan that works for all of our downtown businesses. We need to stop making exceptions for the few and start helping the many, as Councilmember Harmon promised. Extending this outdoor dining program as is will financially harm far more businesses than it actually helps. 150 businesses citywide have outdoor dining setups of one kind or another. 90 of them are on the promenade, and only 33 of those will be affected by a 3-foot depth today with this vote. Many businesses have survived with just a parklet, others survived with nothing. So tell me how those businesses fortunate enough to be on the promenade cannot survive if they too have to comply with a smaller patio. It seems to me as greed has overtaken common sense. Landlords are already raising the rents on the promenade, just ask Ember Mill. You have a restaurant on the promenade charging a 5% entertainment district fee to every check. If the free patio space wasn't enough, that's just pure greed taking additional money. Some say there's not enough time to comply. There was 9+ months of clear documentation that this would end, possibly on March 8th. Even easier if you had portable materials as suggested from day one. Many say the cost is too great. Remember, we all had PPPs and grants to help us get through this period. Opal had $800,000, Painted Cabaret, $400,000, Bouchon, $600,000, Olio, over $2 million. Benchmark and the Bennett family, $5 million. Mitza, $1.3 million. Bob Stout, over $1.5 million. Janine's, $2.4 million. Good Lion, over $1.5 million. If that's not enough for a newer, smaller, portable patio, I'm not sure what is. This fight today is not about our city. This fight is about greed. The new plan moving forward for recovery needs to address all of your business community's needs, not just a handful of restaurants. Please help bring equality into the final plan for recovery. The rest of us have waited long enough for it. Thank you so much for your time. We'll see you later on today.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. Do we have any other public speakers?
We do not have anyone else who has their hand raised. Again, if you're attending this meeting and would like to speak on this item, you can raise your hand within the app. Chair Sneddon, nobody has raised their hand. I think we're done with public comment.
Thank you. Okay, so it's to the committee if we would like to, and I have a question for the attorney's office about if we are required to pass something at ordinance for it to go on to council, or what is our requirement today?
Honorable Chair, there I am. Hello. Yeah, the ordinance committee ordinance requires the committee to review the material and make a recommendation one way or another.
Thank you. So do we have discussion amongst our ordinance committee members? Councilmember Gutierrez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to just throw out the discussion about the outdoor dining fee license, because I feel like if we're going to have this discussion about what to implement and enforce on State Street, I know it kind of makes sense to do it one step at a time, but I also feel like it's something that we should just pull the Band-Aid off at once, so that way we can get as much done as possible, as quickly as possible, and people can adjust to that. I wonder if there's some kind of like understanding we could have where, you know, depending on how that fee comes out to, whether it's per square foot or per furniture item, we can set up some kind of pricing off of that. You know, if you want to, I don't know if this is legal, but you know, if you want to be within that 20-foot safety setback, then you'd have to, you know, pay a larger fee. So that way the businesses are able to do it, but they just have to, you know, do a little more in order to be able to do that, because it's at the cost of the safety of the area. Those are just ideas. I don't know if any of you want to add that to this to send to council, but that's just me just throwing some ideas out there and seeing how you all feel. But other than that, I feel like I'm willing to send this to council the way that it is as well.
Thank you, Councilmember Gutierrez. And do we have a legal response to that about whether we could even legally trade a fire safety lane for fees?
Honorable Chair, members of the committee and committee member Gutierrez, not really. You don't sell public safety, and so the real issue here is once the fire chief and the police chief have said we need the 20 foot that needs to be set, and our recommendation is to not vary from that. In terms of the fee itself, you can set that fee at a market rate or at a lesser rate depending upon what the council wants to do in terms of licensing the use of public facilities and public property for a fee, and that's something that we can bring back to you very easily. In terms of the outdoor dining license, there are some nuanced amendments that would need to be made to that to allow, for example, alcoholic beverage sales in that portion of the sidewalk that is in the furniture zone that's not immediately adjacent to the building. That's just a technical change to chapter 9.95 that can be swiftly implemented if council directs.
I have another question to piggyback off of that. So is it possible then to implement a higher fee for a business that does not make their outdoor furniture or setup portable? So if a if a business wants to leave it the way it is, they'll be charged more than a business that's willing to have it portable?
I believe that would be a legal distinction and you could do it.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Thank you, Councilmember Gutierrez, and Councilmember Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I know you're trying to look for either something to forward or not. My mind is definitely, I don't have a problem forwarding a resounding support for the 20-foot lane requirement for fire safety. I can't, I'll have some comments this afternoon on how we got to where we are with the timing of that, but I certainly am ready to implement that as soon as possible. And then my preference would actually be that everything else goes to the ad hoc committee. That would be my recommendation, that it doesn't really get hashed out at council yet. I'll again have some less than complimentary comments this afternoon on the outreach that got us here, or lack of outreach. And I think the ad hoc committee or the State Street Advisory Committee is the proper venue to repair that. But that would include the portability date, the discussion of new and existing on whether that should be a different portability date or the same portability date. And as we talked about the other day, all the design components in the guideline document other than the legal ADA requirements and fire code based requirements for heating elements. So I just kind of see this as, in my opinion, is remedy the fire access down the rest of the street, and then actually put it into a stakeholder and ad hoc subcommittee process for the rest of it to be discussed as it should have been in the first place. So that's my 2 cents.
I completely agree and double down on your 2 cents. I think that is right where I was heading as well. I think we do have public safety issues that really the time has come to address, and that will come with some hardship to some. And I think there was some risk there to start with. I really do appreciate the flexibility of fire marshal and our fire department going block by block and really considering public safety holistically. And we're trying to balance the public safety of eating outdoors is also public safety with fire safety, with police safety. And I think I'm really appreciative for the efforts that have been made there. I'm going to make these comments, I think, both now and later about the outreach. And I think in general, it went in reverse order of what it should have done. So just reading in that section, and we can talk about this more at council, but I'll just make the comment here that it starts with sending a notice out. And the notice is already out before stakeholders are engaged, before it comes to the ad hoc. It was the night before the notice goes out that it comes to the State Street Advisory Committee, but not in a substantive way. It's, within that week after that the 18 or 19 or so business entities are contacted, and that's not through the city, but was organized elsewhere. Happy that city representatives participated in that. But I think for this to move forward and to be collaborative, we really need to be reversing that order, that we're doing the outreach and stakeholder meetings and really getting the best information. We have the best information from staff, no question, but the best information also from those affected, including the public, who really overwhelmingly, the letters we've gotten support continuing the outdoor dining. So I am in favor, Mr. Jordan, Councilmember Jordan, of your proposal. And if you wanted to make a motion to that effect, to pass on that we are, from what I heard you say, that we are in support of clearing the fire lane and all the other discussion of portability and so on, and Councilmember Gutierrez as well, assessing fees or any additional ideas, that move to the combination of the ad hoc and the State Street Advisory Committee through process.
I guess I just going down through my notes too. I would include that also to include the West Victoria section, but I'm kind of ambivalent right now on the 1300 block of State Street. But if we were going to look at almost all of it, why not look at it all that way? So if I'm looking for your nod, so I see your nod. So I would move that we recommend to, that our recommendation council is to support the 20-foot fire lane on the date that they show as implemented, and to refer all the other changes or discussion items to the ad hoc subcommittee for action, as you and I just kind of spelled out, and Mr. Gutierrez, a series of better outreach, not backward to forward, but forward first, and that may include the State Street Advisory Committee, it may not, but then to bring council back a set of recommendations for that. That would be my convoluted motion, if it made sense.
Can I add something to that, Mr. Councilmember Jordan? Just to include the 400 block as something to discuss, just to discuss.
Sure, certainly. So we'll add that also.
And I'll second the motion.
And for clarification, it also includes a discussion of assessing fees, licensing fees as well.
As I think we also talked about at the ad hoc meeting last week already. Yep.
Well, we have a motion, we have a second, and can we have a roll call vote?
Okay, I'm just going to read the recommendation. And
I'm so sorry for that terrible verbiage on the motion.
That's okay, we'll do our best.
Okay.
So recommendation is to forward to council to support the 20-foot fire lane and refer all other changes and discussion items to the ad hoc subcommittees for actions as spelled out. This will include the 400 block of State Street and licensing and fees. Other licensing and fees? Does that sound right?
As long as, I guess, as long as we have good notes on all the other else to make sure that it specifically includes the 1300 block of State Street and the West Victoria block also.
Is that included in the staff report though?
My motion is contrary to the staff report in this particular case.
So to include 1300 block and Victoria?
And West Victoria.
And West Victoria. This was moved by Councilmember Jordan, seconded by Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez. Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Aye.
Councilmember Jordan
Yes.
and Chair Snedden.
Yes. And with that, I do have a question if we have a time estimate for when this item might be heard at council. I've received a question on that and I thought this might be a good opportunity to give an estimate.
Second administrative item at council, the item before it is the police department update. I would expect that this will be heard sometime after 3 o'clock, but that's just my best guess. As you know, it depends how much public comment we get on other items and how much discussion you have on the police department item. So probably after 3 o'clock and maybe even more likely 3:30, but no guarantees there.
Understood. No guarantees, and that. Thank you for that. And I believe with that, we are adjourned.